this is great. This is about
Okay.
4 years in the making, where I've tried to get you up here, and finally we are here. And this is an opportunity to talk a little bit about you and, your background and your career. But before we really get going, talk a little bit about your mom and dad.
Oh, well, my mother was a teacher, but not, that was in the 40s when I was a really little boy. And she didn't teach until I was at Notre Dame, out of the house. But my mother had been a teacher. She was a stay-at-home mother. I had one brother. And my father had a lumber mill. He was in the lumber business. And we lived in Erie. His lumber mill was in Spartansburg in Crawford County, next county south of Erie. Mm-hmm. And so he would drive back and forth and be home on the weekends and on Wednesday night, but Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, he would stay over in Corey, which is near Spartansburg. And that's in the days before expressways. But anyway, my brother was in the lumber business and followed in Dad's footsteps, went off to a lumber school and stayed with it. My dad finally wanted a larger size mill, and so he came to Warren County, Pennsylvania, out of Crawford County, and of course that's where all the timber is. About half the county is national forest and some of the other state game lands. So anyway, that's at a point, then he was driving back and forth and decided this is too much. So when I was about 10, I believe, we moved to Warren County, Pennsylvania. The Robert H. Jackson well, not the birthplace as far as location, but as far as county. And so I went to Youngsville High School and then went off to Notre Dame. But anyway, then when I went to Notre Dame, my father died when I was 14, and my mother then went back to teaching once I was out of the house and my older brother was out of the house. So
You were graduating, you went to Youngsville, and then was that a high school then, or did you go from there to Warren High School?
No. In those days, Youngsville, which is a small town of 2,500, about 10 miles from Warren, it had its own school district, and that encompassed some of the surrounding townships. And so I think there were about 75 in my class, and so I graduated from Youngsville High School. So I didn't go to Warren at all. And I never moved to Warren until the 1970s, 77 maybe or so.
Okay. So you graduated from Youngsville High School at Notre Dame. Was that top of list, or why there?
That was the top of the list.
Yeah.
Well, at that point, among Irish Catholics, Notre Dame has a preeminent spot.
It does.
Generally. They always talk about the subway alumni, and there were no subways in Warren County, Pennsylvania, but the Irish Catholic families, and I think other Catholic families probably generally loved Notre Dame before they ever got there. So I applied to different places, but that's the one that I wanted to go to. So went there and was very happy there, loved it.
So you went there for 4 years.
Yes.
And during that time period, football obviously is a foremost product there.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't go to a game. No, we were at every game. We did not have to pay for tickets. We could go to any of these, basketball, baseball, football, anything. And of course, there was no way we'd miss a football game. And it was just so much fun. The weekend was just so charged, so exciting.
Was this the era Parisian time period?
No, I'm older than that. Actually, it was Kaharick and Brennan. We had some bad ones at the time, and so our one-loss record wasn't too great. But I'm trying to remember which year we beat Oklahoma, which was #1, and they actually gave us a day off of school the next on the Monday.
Really?
Because it was such a big deal. Yeah. Yeah, now you remember sports events and dates and numbers with precision, and I don't. But
Terry Brennan would have been one of the coaches? And
yes,
Joe Kuharich?
Yeah. And Joe Kuharich made it, he was successful in the pros, but he just wasn't right for college sports.
So who was was there a name?
Paul Hornung was the biggest star
Paul
when I was there.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. He was the big one, yeah.
Oh, yeah, he went on to big times. Paul Hornung went on to big time.
Yeah, oh yeah, he stayed with it, yeah.
I'm trying to think whether he was the Heisman Award winner or not. I forget.
I see, that's the sort of thing you remember, and I think he was.
Yeah.
I'm quite sure. And by the way, it has nothing to do with this interview, but it'd be interesting for people from Buffalo who would possibly listen to this. Joe Kabaki was in my high school class out of Youngsville High School, went to Purdue, played football there on a football scholarship, and then played for the Buffalo Bills for a few years. So there's a sports tie-in from my past.
And
very nice guy.
And I don't know why, but I have an autograph that I came across recently to Greg from Joe Kabaki.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I don't know, I can't even remember the context. I was going to really wow you with the context, but I met him and he signed the back of a card.
Sure.
Anyways. So you graduate from Notre Dame and you then went off to law school?
Yes.
Was that natural for you to go from college to law school? Was there any pause as to where you were going to go from there?
No, that was 1960, and this whole idea of the pause, the year break, wasn't something anybody did. I suppose there may have been a few for some unusual reasons, but everybody, when you were getting near the end of your undergraduate years, you thought about what am I going to do next, and if you were interested in going on further, where am I going to be going and what I'll be doing. And so I wanted to come back to Pennsylvania, even though the major law schools are national, they're not limited, they're not, for example, like Dickinson emphasized Pennsylvania law. I wanted to go to University of Pennsylvania. First of all, of course, it has such a high rating and has maintained it. And second of all, I just wanted to be in Pennsylvania for law school. And I also liked the idea of being in a larger city. I lived in Erie as a young child until I was about 10, then moved to Warren County, then South Bend, Indiana, and I was ready to enjoy a little bit of city life, as much as you can get when you're in law school.
So you went to the University of Pennsylvania?
Yes, yeah.
And of course, at University of Pennsylvania, they have the famous Palestra.
Yes. I went a couple times. It's funny, the law student generally just didn't go.
Really?
Yeah. And the same thing. Of course, I'd been at football games at Notre Dame with all the big teams and all the hoopla that goes, all the excitement, the things that are happening on campus, and bands marching around, and people selling hot dogs and sausage sandwiches, so when I went to Penn, my first year there, I went over to a football game. A group of us did, and first of all the students didn't seem to care that much. The team was out there on the field, and then a lot of the students left before the game was over. I was just pretty much shocked, at the indifference. And so didn't go back to football games. And I can't remember any of my law school friends. Some of them went over, and I went over basketball a few times, because basketball was big there. And especially when they played another Philadelphia team.
Right.
They had the five teams.
Yeah,
and
LaSalle was one of them. And
LaSalle and Villanova, oh my goodness, Temple, and the one right across the street from Penn. Oh my goodness, it's not coming to me. See, I told you my memory wasn't good.
Well, it's very good that you came up with those, because I did
on
not.
a word.
But basketball was huge, and certainly during that time period. in
Yeah.
that Pennsylvania area. And didn't they play at the football field? Was that called Franklin Field?
Yes,
Yeah, that's where
yes,
the,
you're right, Franklin
Eagles.
Field.
That's where the Philadelphia Eagles also played there.
Did they play at Franklin? I'd forgotten that.
Yeah, yeah.
Also, when I was there, I got to a Army-Navy game. And President, again, showing my age, President Kennedy was there. And that's the first I realized that the president goes from the Navy side to the Army side, or sometimes I guess it's the opposite. When I was there, I was sitting on the Navy side, and he was on the Navy side. And I remember for some reason, I guess he wanted to look pretty hardy, so he did not wear an overcoat, even though all the rest of us did. He had a suit. Who knows, maybe he had long johns. But,
And for the camera, just so you know that the Army-Navy game is always in either the first week in December or the last week in November. It's cold.
Cold, yeah, yeah, that's right. So, and then I got to another one of those too. That was fun. And Navy played Notre Dame in Philadelphia too, so I got to go to that one Navy Notre Dame game.
You keep bringing up Navy, and I know that's part of your world too. Did you at some point become part of ROTC and anything?
No, it was Vietnam, and I would have been drafted. And so I looked into what I wanted to do as far as the military went, and I wanted to be a lawyer in the military. And so anyway, I checked into it and checked it out, and then applied for. It wasn't called JAG Corps then. The Army had a JAG Corps. Navy just had line officers with a different designators, like 1625 or something, whatever. And those were the lawyers. And so I wanted to be a Navy lawyer. After I served my clerkship in Pennsylvania, we had to have a preceptor. When we went to law school, we'd get a preceptor, and I had a lawyer from Warren, R. Pearson Eaton, and you had to serve an internship of 6 months, and it can be broken up, a couple months each summer, however you wanted to do it. And so we needed that in order to be admitted to the bar. That was later eliminated, and one of the reasons was it was determined that probably it was keeping out minorities. If you didn't get a lawyer to accept you and say, okay, I'm going to help you get into the bar by letting you work for me for free, for 6 months. Excuse me, did I say, yeah, 6 months. But anyway, the minority, I can't say specifically, definitely African Americans were having a tough time getting into the Pennsylvania bar. So it was eliminated. But at my time, we had that. So after I served the internship, then I went into the Navy, and I got into JAG. Or, well, it wasn't JAG, then it became JAG. I got into the Navy.
When did you initially, you done your preceptorship while you were at University of Pennsylvania?
Yes, you did it in the summer, and
Okay.
you could do it then after law school to finish it up. So I finished it up after law school. I'd done it, a few months through the summer. And once that was done, then I was able to go. So went into the Navy, because we were still line officers, we weren't a separate corps. I had to go to officer candidate school, learn things like navigation and piloting, march around, every time you left the barracks, you had to march around. You were treated like just a line officer, and got through that. And then they had a naval justice school, which was also at Newport, Rhode Island. And then you were freer, you were an officer then. So went to Naval Justice School. And that was, I think, 3 months. And then I got an assignment to Bethesda Naval Hospital in Washington, where I was the assistant legal officer. And that was very interesting. And so I was there for a year and a half at least, and then down to Portsmouth, Virginia, as the legal officer, and that was the largest naval hospital on the East Coast, biggest one on the West Coast, San Diego. And of course, you had all these poor, suffering. Well, we had Marines, because the Marines Corps is part of the Navy, coming back from Vietnam with horrible injuries. You know, sailors coming back with horrible injuries from things blowing up on the ship and so on. But anyway, I was there to give legal advice to the enlisted and to the command, and to arrange any court-martial if it would occur, or captain's mass, which was a lesser degree of court, you might say.
Right. What part of that did you enjoy the most?
I found it all interesting. I liked it so much that after I got off of active duty, I stayed in the reserves, drilled up here at Jamestown at the Reserve Center until I completed my the full number of years that I could complete. I stayed in as long as I could, and then so I retired from the reserves as a captain. But I think it was just I enjoyed working with the people, giving legal advice, which was nice, because that I knew then that when I got into private practice, I would enjoy that. When there would be a sailor injured in an accident, say, and at that time they weren't paid much, the enlisted people, so they would have motorcycles often, and people wouldn't see them, and there'd be terrible accidents. And I would investigate those to determine whether the Navy had a cause of action against the driver who had caused the accident. You never collected from the enlisted person, or it could be an officer too, whatever. And so I just found it very interesting.
Well, it gave you general practice. I mean, the reality
Yes.
was a skill set there.
Oh, I know. It really set me up with what I needed to know, that experience.
Is you carried on in the reserve? Is that where your paths crossed with Raleigh Kidders?
Yes, up here at Jamestown. Yeah, sure.
Because Raleigh was in the reserves at that time?
He was in the reserves. I was there drilling. I'm apparently a little older because I got out of the active duty before he did and was drilling up here. And then Raleigh started a few years after I did. Well, quite a few years, I think. I'm trying to remember. And then, but he didn't stay with it. Then when he got busy off to Albany and so on, he didn't have time, so he couldn't drill with the Navy. And I drilled up here, and then when they did get a Jaguar going, I would go, even though they let me drill here, there was no real legal position, but I was able to do wills, powers of attorney for the people who were drilling there, and any advice of various kinds to the command. But anyway, then I would go 2 weeks of active duty every year, and I went to London twice, went to San Francisco twice, went to Norfolk, which was kind of fun for me to be back in that area. So it was very nice for a lawyer from a small town to have those experiences. And then, but also I drilled in Pittsburgh. I had to go down there like one weekend every quarter or so. I forget what it was, because there's no real position for a lawyer here. They kind of made it for me.
Yeah. So while this is all happening, by the way, you mentioned the term preceptor. It sent a shiver up my spine, because I went to Dickinson School of Law, and they had just eliminated that.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
and that was just something that was great because I wasn't quite sure how it all played for me. I was one of only two people from New York State actually at Dickinson, because you're right, mostly everybody was Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Pennsylvania.
People,
they emphasized
they
it.
emphasized
People,
Pennsylvania.
yeah.
So anyway, the term preceptor I haven't heard in years, but at the time they had just eliminated it, which was great, because I couldn't quite figure out how that worked in my world.
Yeah.
But also, you graduate from University of Pennsylvania, you join the Navy, but at some point you decide to practice law. to actually go into the practice of law. At what point did that all happen?
Well, I always knew from the time I went, well, when I first went to law school, I wasn't sure I wanted to practice law. I thought, I think this will be interesting. I'll see how it goes. And then actually the preceptorship really helped, because those times that I would work in the law office in Warren, I realized I really like this. And this is something I'll enjoy. So that's how I knew I would like the practice of law. Law school is more theoretical, and it doesn't really give you a feeling for the practice of law. It gives you maybe an interest in the academic and the philosophical, the judicial, whatever I want to say, aspect of it. And but that's how I knew really from the serving, in those law offices.
But you didn't start out on your own. You worked in a law office?
Yeah. There were two other lawyers in there. Pete Eaton, he'd gone to Pitt Law School, and Bill Hill, who had gone to Dickinson. And so I went in with them, and it was good. Actually, we always had independent practices. We were associated, but not a firm. Huh. And but then they would, when I was starting out, they would feed work to me, because they were both busy. They were successful and had a lot of work, and so they would hand work over to me, and that got me started. And then after I'd only been there a few years, there was a vacancy in the district attorney's office, and so I decided I'll run for district attorney. That'll be good. And again, my Navy experience, some of it was criminal because we had the court martials and captain's mast. And so I became the district attorney of Warren County.
Prior to that, you were the assistant district attorney. Was that
No, it's backwards.
Oh, we're backwards.
I was the district attorney.
Oh, okay.
And then after 4 years, I thought, this is taking too much time for my practice because of all the administrative stuff along with the courtroom stuff. And then a few years later, they decided to add a second assistant. And they came to me and said, well, there'd be no training. Would you be willing to take this on? Because now it won't take up so much of your time. You'll just be doing, certain cases. And I said, well, as long as I can do the work in court, but absolutely no administrative, that I would enjoy. So then I went back as an assistant. So just the opposite of what you would normally think.
And obviously I was wrong. So did they, within the office itself, it sounded like it was a rather small office, district attorney's office, was yourself and an assistant?
Two others. Oh, in the DA's office?
The DA's office.
Yes. Myself and one assistant, yeah.
Did you divide up the labor? Some cases where you'll do the felonies and somebody will do the misdemeanors?
Not that formal, no. It would just be the big cases the DA has a responsibility to take. And, you wouldn't pass that on to an assistant. But they would be there. There are all these things that are just not rote, but almost, the sentencing, those little hearings that are preliminary hearings and so on. Except, again, in a big case, preliminary hearing would be important. We used to have grand jury. Just, I think you pretty much divided up the routine work. I guess I'll say that.
Do you remember your first big trial?
There were so many. I knew you'd be asking me that, and I just had so many, and it's funny. When we were in training to become new judges in Pennsylvania, they emphasized get into court, get it done with, and put it out of your mind. And I guess, and maybe I did it too much. If I really sat and thought, I've had malpractice cases, I've had homicides, I've had, over all the years, there's just so many that it'd be hard to go back and dredge them up. Some fights between corporations on various matters, estates. But it's hard for me just to pull one out and say, okay, here's one that I think is the most exciting or
Well, it's always the first one, it's just like somebody who does their first argument before the Supreme Court.
Yes.
They always remember that, and it's
Yeah.
usually very gut-wrenching, and no matter
Yeah.
how much you think know what you're doing, you always doubt yourself.
Yeah,
And,
no, my mind doesn't work that's strange, but.
Well, good for you.
That's what I told you when you wanted to interview me. I said, I should have gone back and
No.
really thought up, tried to think of a bunch of things, and should have been more prepared for what you might be asking me.
Well, as a practice, so you were district attorney early on. I mean, you're fairly young
Yeah,
at that point. And then practice, and then you, part of your time then became assistant district attorney.
yeah.
And at what point did somebody knock on your door and say, would you be interested in running for judge? Or was that something you always thought that would be, is that a natural step from
A
district
lot
attorney?
of people did. I think there wasn't any one person. And in Warren, it isn't political. You run on both parties. I won in Warren County on both parties. And then Forest County, we have a second county attached. In Forest County, I won on the Republican Party and very close on the Democrat side. But anyway, in the general election, I didn't have to worry because I'd won on both parties. So it wasn't political. So it isn't like some political leader would come to me and say, we really need you to run for the party. We want to keep this in a particular party. But no, nothing like that. Just a lot of people who I knew, and they knew that the judge would be retiring, and they said, we think you'd do a good job. Lawyers as well, a lot of lawyers asked me if I would do that.
Well, what judge retired?
That was Judge Wolf.
Judge Wolf. And, gosh, he was there for almost 23 years as a judge,
Yeah.
1970 through 1993.
Yeah.
And in between there was there a second judge, Judge Millen? Paul Millen?
Oh, Paul Millen was still there.
Was still there?
Because, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I told you I say things incorrectly. I didn't run because somebody had retired. I ran because Judge Millen got the second position going. Yeah, that's right. He ran when Judge Wolf retired. So he had been in there a few years, realized it's too much for one judge, decided to make the second judge position, asked me if I would do it. And at that time, a lot of the lawyers asked me to do it. So I became the first second judge.
Yeah, I'm just reading, and William F. Morgan was elected as the first secondary judge of the district in 2001. You began your term in January 2002.
Then Judge Millen retired. I became the president judge in 2006, and Judge Maureen Skirta came in as the second judge. She was elected. Then 2010, I had to retire because sitting judges had to retire at the age of 70. So I retired, but you could become a senior judge, which I did, until you were 78, and I loved it, so I stayed on as a senior judge. And as a senior judge, you're like a substitute teacher. I went around to different counties. I served in Warren County a lot when they needed help, but I also went to Erie, Crawford, went down to Center County on one of the Sandusky problems down there. But the one that I went to the most, they were short a judge in McKean County. Judge Yoder had just retired right at the time that I became a senior judge. So I was over there about 3 times a week for a few years.
Wow.
That was fun. I loved it over there.
As judge, there's a judge's school, isn't there? So when you become a court of common pleas, and for the camera in Pennsylvania, that's the trial court level.
Common pleas is, yes. Court of general jurisdiction is the term.
Thank you. And similarly, up here would be the new Supreme Court is
Yes.
what we refer to up here in New York. So that's kind of a similar level. But is there, when you got elected, did you have to go off to school someplace and learn about how to be a judge?
Oh, yes, they had it's commonly jokingly referred to as baby judges school. And we went down to Penn State, stayed at the Nittany Inn, and we were there for 2 weeks.
Ah,
Now it's down to 1 week. I suppose they could do a lot now, through the digital method rather than the whatever you want to call it, the internet.
so all of a sudden you become from an advocate, prosecutor, district attorney, and general practitioner, all of a sudden you're on the other side of the bench. You are now Judge Morgan, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Did that change your kind of standing and philosophy and just sort of thinking from being the advocacy all, did you feel like your mind all of a sudden had to switch off and switch on a certain area?
You do that. I mean, that just happens, You have to make sure that you don't favor one side over the other, but you see the problems in one side and in the other side, you see the negatives and the positives. It's interesting too, after, being a lawyer and then sitting on the bench, you're very critical inside. You don't express it, but when you see the lawyers arguing their case or the way they handle their case or what witnesses they call, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, why are they doing it this way? They're just messing up their whole case. Or you're sitting there and saying, oh my goodness, that guy is great, that guy, I mean, male or female, that this lawyer is just fantastic, and isn't it clever the way he or she is doing such a thing, and or the way they're arguing their arguments, the way they're cross-examining. So, but you're sort of critically analyzing the techniques of the lawyers, and but you have to not favor one side over the other, especially having been a prosecutor. There have been a big break from the time I've been a prosecutor until I became a judge. So I didn't really feel that I favored the prosecution in any way.
Did you keep a diary? Did you keep notes to yourself?
I wish I had, then I'd be much better on this interview.
No, I'm just curious, as you're going through that. You say, boy, today, I listened to such and such, and he might be a local attorney or a guy from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh attorney comes up and he showed some technique that I'd never seen before,
Yes, we had a lot of Pittsburgh and Erie lawyers coming in. Because a lot of Warren lawyers just don't take the types of cases that get into court. They're not litigators.
So for a period of time, it was you and Judge Millen. In the courthouse, there were certain cases that you generally took and certain ones that he took? Was there a division of labor?
No, for example, I'll give you an example of a county where there is a clear division of labor. Over in McKean County, the one judge does the criminal and the other judge does the civil.
Okay.
And but no, we mixed it up, which made it interesting. You just the way it would be assigned would be sort of what case came in, who was working. Maybe you were into some big medical malpractice case that would be very difficult to handle. It would take a lot of time. Well, then some new case would come in, and that would be assigned to the other judge. It was just a matter of what was convenient and practical is the way the assignments would be made.
And so the two of you would go into chambers and just discuss it, or?
Some things the court administrator could realize and actually make those assignments. But if it was something a little unusual or something that might be very time-consuming, the two judges could talk about it. But the president judge has the decision.
Right.
president judge can always say, okay, I'm taking such and such. And that's sort of the same as when I said the district attorney, who felt an obligation to take the big cases. The president judge in Warren County would feel that he or she should take something that would be really difficult.
Did you have a case or two maybe, and I'm not looking for a highlight case, but which had a lot of publicity outside of Warren County, so that you had to kind of deal with the media, where they show up in the courtroom and they're a presence,
As a DA, I had a case that brought that in. In fact, we were written up in a crime magazine, and I was called the boyish, bespectacled district attorney. And that was that was O'Dooley, who bludgeoned his 2 children and his wife, and then set the house on fire. And that became a really big case. Of course, that's pretty horrific circumstances. And so that one I remember because I was written up in a crime magazine. And I know if I just had tried to pull some of these things together, I know there were some that had some publicity when I was a judge, but for some reason, I'm drawing a blank.
I know.
If somebody would remind us, remember such and such, I'd say, yes, I remember that.
But I know I had a chance to talk to Judge Cleland. Of course, he dealt with the Sandusky case.
Right.
And that was a media frenzy.
That was a media frenzy. I went down there after he was done with the actual trial itself. There were other things that had to be cleaned up. And the 3 judges from Warren, 2 senior judges and Judge Millen, I can't think what aspect he was involved in. I was involved in the dissolution of the charity, the Second Mile that Sandusky had started and run. And because, even though it was a very good charity, it did wonderful work, but because of his association with it, and actually it started it, they couldn't get donations any longer, and it had to be dissolved. So the question is, where do the assets go? And so they needed a judge to determine that, and so the assets were all sold and the money distributed to other charities. So I was in on that aspect of it, and of course that had some publicity. But I know there were some in Warren who are just drawing a blank.
Well, it's dealing with the media. We have that currently here with the Rushdie case.
Oh, sure.
In Chautauqua County, the judge has got to deal with that aspect of it, Judge Foley.
Well, I had nothing like the Rushdie case.
Well, nobody really has had that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've always just enjoyed, Judge Morgan, but you're in the lineage of being a president judge, the 37th Judicial District, and within that lineage is Judge Allison Wade.
That's right.
And you probably know more about that particular instance of, just right here, on January 13th, 1954, while presiding on the bench over the divorce trial of Norman Moon, Judge Wade was shot during the proceedings. The first assassination of a judge in Pennsylvania, and it occurred in your courtroom, and you are very gracious always to kind of do a tour.
Show the bullet holes.
Yeah. So did that, when you first became judge, or was, well, I should back up, just saying, within Warren County Bar Association, was that a common conversation about Judge Wade and what happened there?
Oh, not by the time I came back as a lawyer. I mean, every once in a while it would come into the conversation, it would come up, something might bring up that subject. But, that was in 1954. That's long before I became a lawyer and was practicing in Pennsylvania. So it didn't come up often. You think about it, of course, and when you become a judge, sheriff is there giving you instructions on security, and You know, it's something you're aware of. And you kind of put it out of your mind. It bothered me the first time after I was a judge when I saw the picture, the photograph of Judge Wade lying on the floor, right where I had to walk from chambers to get onto the bench, you know, many times a day. And the thing also, over in the Historical Society, right next door to the courthouse, at times they had the gun there and that shot Judge Wade, and that just gave me chill. I couldn't look at it. Same thing with that picture. I had to look away because I was you know, I worked right there where that had happened.
Well, you preside at a bench where in the bench
Yeah.
is the bullet hole.
Yeah, well, yes, at the front of the bench.
In the front of the bench,
yeah. And in the walls by the two doors leading out of the courtroom. Yeah.
Was there at some point, because I've heard you give the speech, where you became more curious about the background? I mean, just kind of learning more than that event. A cat happened to him, and he was shot and killed. To learn more of the background of it, is that something you researched? Is that something you learned about?
Well, no, you read some of the case law, and there was a book written that I certainly don't want I don't really want to discuss that book because it made me go and look at some more of the evidence and actually some of the opinions out of the appellate courts on that case. And also, but the main thing is I knew people who knew him, you know. There are plenty of people around when I was first practicing law who knew Judge Wade and thought of him as a very respectable, high-minded, good person. And so this book makes him out to be something other than that. And the people that I know who knew him all would disagree with that.
Yeah.
And and also one of the opinions, I'm trying to think of the name, there was a very colorful opinion writer on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court who just praised him as one of the best jurists in the state, and how he admired his work and the opinions that Judge Wade had written, his decisions, and so he was well respected.
Norman Moon who was the assassin, was still in jail at the time you came back to Warren, wasn't he?
Yes, and then when I was a district attorney, I would get a letter from him about once a year, and he sounded very, very out of touch with reality, and I think that maybe that was written for that purpose, because he had been given the death penalty, and then it was determined by the psychiatrist that he was not mentally fit to be executed. He was mentally, he was of sound mind at the time of the murder, but at the time that he would have to be executed, he was not mentally capable of being executed. So anyway, he had to keep us, I guess, sure that he was still, the word used to be insane, but anyway, let's say not of stable mind. And so he would write a letter to the DA every year. I believe that was the purpose. Otherwise, why would he be writing and all this crazy nonsense that didn't make sense, not in touch with reality in these letters? So I had a little...
Was he asking for anything, like commutation or anything?
No, he just wanted to write. He wasn't really asking for anything. He just went on and on and on about. It was so nonsensical that I can't even tell you what the letter said. Yeah. You know, but it was fun to read it just because you could see what he was trying to do. So.
As judge or district attorney, sometimes you get involved in very controversial cases that has some extreme emotion behind it. Did you ever fear for yourself? Was there any circumstances where kind of like you got a letter or a call or something?
A number of death threats.
Yeah.
And of course, we have in the front of our house is a sign because we had to sign up for the service, what's the word I want?
For the what?
The service to protect your house.
Yeah.
I can't think of the name.
Security, yeah.
Yeah, it's a type of security service that they have for the house, and I got it. But, I had death. One was a patient at the state hospital, and when she got out, she would send cartoons of just horrible things happening to me or to my family, my children or grandchildren, and describe horrible things, tortures. And then there were two guys who wrote letters to me and to Judge Skirta, and they said, well, we're not getting out for a long time, but we have friends who are getting out. And then there were a few others that letters came in on. So there were death threats.
How'd you react to all of that? I mean, this is emotion. This is personal.
Well, you just have to tell yourself, I'm being careful. I'm doing what the sheriff tells me. He would say, well, of course, I live close enough to the courthouse. I didn't have to drive unless I wanted my car for some other purpose during the day. But, drive a little different route, walk a little different route, wear the vest if you need it for the case that maybe somebody might have a gun. That kind of thing. But you just somehow just live with it and hope that it won't happen. You can't sit there and worry about it.
Had there always been security in the within the courthouse? I mean, was there always a police officer in the courtroom when you had trials or hearings or motions?
After Judge Wade.
Okay.
From then on, we always had deputy sheriffs in the courtroom.
Okay.
So you always felt, protected there. And if the case, the criminal case, there might be a couple of them. There might be more. If it would be a more controversial case, there might be some at every door, There'd be plenty of precaution there.
One of the things in your biography is being very much involved with the Warren Historical Society. I mean, you're a history guy. You enjoy history.
Actually, I have been on every board. I think the hospital board, the library board, the Cancer Society board, the church board. I'm just about in Shakespeare Club. I'm very active in the community. And actually, I belong to the Historical Society, but I don't. My wife is active in that. She's a history teacher, so she's more into the history. So Historical Society, I enjoy, and I go over there for various events, but I've never been on their board. Just
as sometimes should you go over there and you ask Michelle Gray to dig up the file on Robert Jackson that they have there. And if you haven't looked at it, it's fascinating because within the file is several letters from the justices who came to Jamestown through Warren for the funeral of Justice Jackson. And one of your predecessors, Judge Alexander Flick, wrote letters to all of the justices who came here, thanking them.
Oh, okay.
Coming, and they all wrote back. So I have a file of copies of the letters that various from Justice Earl Warren and Frankfurter and Douglas and so on to Judge Flick.
Okay, well, that would be interesting, and I could go over and ask Michelle to show those to me. Yeah, and I knew Judge Flick. He was still there when I first started. He was a judge before Judge Wolf.
So anyways, there's a connection there of one of your judges who happened to be, by circumstance, the presiding judge and was involved in things here in Jamestown for
Yeah.
the Jamestown Bar. He was one of the guests at the Moonbrook, where we'll be going. And that's where, but yeah, it's fun, because I came across it recently, the whole file, that Judge Flick and the correspondence.
Yeah, but it might be interesting. There are other things in their files on Jackson, too, that might be interesting.
Yeah, the whole thing's pretty interesting. So
Yeah.
that, and of course, we have in the audience somebody named Peggy, and curious how you met her.
Well, I met her because she was my roommate at Notre Dame's little sister.
Ah.
So she was about 4 years younger. Never would have thought of dating her. You know, she was the little sister of my roommate. So I met her, I believe it was in the summer after my freshman year. We went to visit my roommate in Cleveland. And so I got to know her, you know, visit the family occasionally over the years. And then when I talked about the Navy-Notre Dame game in Philadelphia, she was going to Marymount College outside New York City, and there was a Notre Dame train for Notre Dame fans to come down from Boston and stop in New York and various places, get to Philadelphia. So she and a number of her friends were on that train, and so another friend of mine from Notre Dame had been coming through on a business trip, stopped at Marymount and saw Peggy, and written me, say, you know, Peggy has grown up. You know, she's no longer just a little sister. And, you know, we went out for dinner and so on. And so then he said, you know, she'll be coming down to Philadelphia for the Navy game. And so I wrote to her. And so I went over to 30th Street Station and met her when she got off the train. And we went to, Penn has law clubs, and there was a law club party, sort of like a fraternity, but not quite. And went to a party and then to an Irish dance, of all things. And so after that, we started writing, but she then took off for a year in England. So that put things on hold for a while. And then when we were both back in this area, she came back to Cleveland to get a master's and then to teach, and I came back to practice law and started dating, you know, there. So that's how all that happened.
Now, when she was, where was she teaching, here?
She was teaching in Cleveland.
Cleveland, okay.
But I mean, then so we'd date on the weekends. And of course, you know, as friends of her family, I'd known them before I knew her. I knew her parents and her brother before I knew her. And so I'd visit Cleveland, and we had some good friends of the family in Youngsville there, who she would stay with them and come and visit me occasionally. But we saw each other in almost every, well, maybe not every weekend, but about three weekends out of the month. And then when she married me, then she taught in Warren County for a little bit till we had our first child, and then stopped again until her children were all in school.
You know, here we are at the Robert H. Jackson Center, and that's where you and I and Peggy met, and ultimately Peggy became a member of the board, and you guys are still actively involved. But I forget how the original contact came here with the center, with you and Peggy. Was it through Raleigh? Do you remember?
That's something that
You know, I
Peggy could answer, and I can't remember. No, it wasn't. It wasn't through Raleigh, I don't think. And I'm not sure how that happened. Somehow we became aware of it, and we're both interested. And she, of course, with her history background, got into it very heavily and ended up on the board.
For those interested, as I look at the microphone, we did do an interview with Peggy Morgan, and it's on YouTube, and you can probably refer to that to find out the answer.
Yes. Yes.
I don't remember. You know, I'm looking at an article that appeared in the Times Observer, Judge, and it's entitled, "A Familiar Face Has Returned to the Warren County Courthouse," and it was the unveiling of the portrait of you by Luis Alvarez Royer?
To Warren for an exhibit at our Crary Gallery.
Okay.
And we met him there, saw his work, and decided he was the one we wanted. So he lives in New Jersey, and our daughter lives in New Jersey, both outside of New York City. So on one of the weekends that we went to New York, we had it arranged, and he did I think we went up there a couple times, and he did the color study, and then he does the portrait. But he gets what he needs in these few sessions, and then he goes from there. And so he completed the portrait. And since then, he's become quite famous. He's done the head of the Federal Reserve, trying to blank on the name. Anyway, and some famous artists, famous people in government and in the arts. And so it's interesting. It's good I got him when I did. He's probably, very, very expensive now. It wasn't cheap, but it was not what it would be now to try and hire him. He's very, very nice man. We still hear from him.
Well, you're quoted in the article as saying, "Those of you who know me, I never sit still."
Yes.
It's kind of a strange feeling to see yourself on the wall.
Oh, yes. Yeah, when I did go, I didn't know if I'd be able to last through those sessions, because there were times when you couldn't move your face. You had to be at a certain angle, and you couldn't smile. You couldn't you couldn't react in any way. And he'd be talking, but you couldn't react to what he was saying. But also just having to sit there in a certain position and hold still was very, very difficult. This went on for, I think the first session was like 5 hours or something, and he would give me a break.
Was he sketching at the time, or was he just?
He did sketches, and then he did color study. So he did, various ways, whatever his ways were. He did like a quick study that he could then develop later. Yeah.
Wow. You take pictures, a lot of.
And pictures too,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Fascinating.
So that was
Well, that's
an interesting experience.
an honor, and there it is in the Robert H. Jackson courtroom.
Yes, it is. It's in the Jackson courtroom, yeah.
Well, in fact, were you the presiding judge when that courtroom was dedicated?
No, I was a judge,
Yeah.
but that was Judge Millen, because he got the commissioners to agree, and the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania to agree to establish a second spot for a judge there in Warren County. Then he needed another courtroom. So when I first got there, we had a makeshift room down in the basement that either one of us would have to go down to if there was something going on, two at the same time, which occurs often. And so then the commissioners were planning to add to the courthouse anyway, so he got them to put in that nice second courtroom.
And I remember when the portrait of Jackson was unveiled, and that was we were all part of that process.
Right.
There. In fact, trying to think when Senator, your Pennsylvania Senator.
Toohey or Casey?
No, before that, Arlen Specter.
Arlen Specter, way back.
Yeah,
Yeah,
way
I
back,
knew
yeah.
him as a DA from the DA Association meetings, yeah.
Yeah, he came to the courthouse and spoke. It was a Jackson-related event.
Yes.
And his friend.
David Swanson was a classmate and friend of his.
From Ludlow.
Ludlow, David Swanson, but lived in Sheffield, Barnes, outside of Sheffield for years, and practiced law in Warren for years.
That was another big day down there. The write-up of the Times Observer, they recounted that you were appointed to hear the case you talked about regarding the Second Mile charity petition to shut down and transfer millions of dollars to a Houston-based charity in July of 2020. 12.
It was very, very similar in its work and its outreach.
Yeah.
And then I think there were a few others that got some money too, but the main one, I think, was that Houston one.
Interviewed Marcy O'Brien
Oh, sure.
about, and our paths, my paths with her crossed because of the library theater.
Okay.
That's how I know her. And that was a time when the Jackson Center used the library theater for a couple of events. And she
Right.
mentioned that you brought her in.
Yeah.
And so, and
Well, see, I was on the board of the library theater because I'm very interested in theater, art. And I'm right now on the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, which is a gubernatorial appointment. And we meet quarterly and dole out money to worthy art venues, places, people, and so on. But anyway, no, I was interested in the theater, so I ended up on the board. But then when I became judge, the judge is the trustee under the trust agreement from Thomas Struthers setting up the theater. And so I would joke with friends and say, well, I own this. in a fiduciary capacity, of course. And, yeah, this is my theater. I own it. It's a beautiful theater, been very successful. And Marcy O'Brien, who's a friend, she was executive director for a number of years. And she did such a good job there, and with the help of other people in the community, and a very generous community financially, too, for the theater. It became the Historic Theater of the Year. It won the top award for the whole country.
wow.
So, but by then I was no longer trustee, but it wasn't, so I can't brag about it.
Oh, go ahead.
Except that I got Marcy involved, and then and she became executive director.
Well, Marcy, as we all know, is a force of nature.
Yes, oh yes, she does wonderful. Well, she's great at everything she does. She's just one of those accomplished people, yeah.
But it was probably during your tenure when they made the decision to do the huge capital improvement.
That was actually during part of my time, yeah, but not as trust. That was before I was trustee.
Okay.
Yeah, just on the board. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But that's a leap. I mean, somebody had to make, was that a hard decision to make, to say, we're going to go out and raise a lot of money to save this
was-
building?
Again, Warren has very generous donors, and we had a lot of people interested in theater in Warren. So that was back, Chuck Tranter was the executive director then, and he was able to, he did a lot of the work himself to go out and get these donors, and he was able to do it. And then we had a lot of people in town who would help to go and tear apart the seats so that they could get a new ones, and do murals on stencils on the walls. A lot of the community actually physically helped as well as financially helped. So it's a wonderful asset to have in that town. I retired.
Go ahead.
Peggy was at the school district office, and one of the administrators said, now that Charles retired as a judge, I wonder if he'd be willing to serve on a board we have for expulsions of students. It has to go before a hearing officer or the school board. And because students can be suspended for a period of time, but if it's over 10 days, then it has to go to an expulsion decision. And so she said, oh, I'm sure he's looking for things to do. And so I'm still sort of like playing judge. We have these little hearings, and I take testimony, and then I have to write up an opinion, write up a report. That goes to the school board, and then they decide whether to accept my decision or not on whether the student should be expelled, and if so, for how long. So, that's one of the things I had to get done. I had had a hearing before I went to New Jersey and had to finish up on that report, so I did do that too. See, now there's something else. It didn't come to my mind
Well,
unless
that's
I got a
noble.
reminder, but yeah, and I enjoyed doing it.
Well, it was also, it probably is consistent with a little phrase that's in here, that since 1967, you had been a master for juvenile cases.
And then I did that before I became a judge. And I did that again. Experience in the Navy helped. And yeah, so that's a little practice to become a judge too. Again, you're hearing cases and making a decision, but it's not the final decision.
So as a master, you make a recommendation to the
to
judge?
the court, yes, to the
Court.
court, yeah.
And juvenile, what's the definition of a juvenile in Pennsylvania?
Under 18.
Under 18?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there circumstances where you can be tried as an adult?
Yes, oh yeah, say it's a homicide,
Mhm.
and it's a very serious, they're enumerated, rape, homicide, certain assaults, aggravated assault, and they look at the record, the circumstances, and then determine whether or not the child should be adjudicated as an adult or as a juvenile. And the judge makes the final decision on that. But the district attorney, the district attorney pretty much makes the decision, but then the defendant can appeal that or ask for the judge to make the final decision.
As we're hearing from the background, the bells, for
Yes.
whom the
I love it.
bells toll.
I like the bells too. Yes.
Well, speaking of assets, the Morgans are assets extraordinaire in Warren County. Both you and your wife Peggy are, talk about forces of nature. You've meant so much to so many. So I thank you. And as you knew you were coming today, reluctant that you might be of coming here to be interviewed.
You have tried it. I keep saying I don't do these interviews well. But
We did really well. Is there a question that you thought I might ask that I haven't asked?
I knew you were going to ask some interesting cases, and I was going to try and go back in my memory and try and dig some up and remember a little detail. So
Well, we did, and you mentioned a few, and I certainly was thrilled to hear about the one. I mean, not every day people get mentioned in crimes, and that you were
Yeah,
the boyish
true.
guy that you were.
Yeah.
And that the whole Norman Moon story is something distinctive to Warren, and
Yeah.
you are a great tour guide. So for any of those who are watching this and you happen to be in the courtroom at the same time, the judges prevail upon him to give you a tour. It's spectacular.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You do it well. Well, thank you. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
well, thank you.
Stand here, the judge would talk to him about the need for support, and he ordered him to pay, I think it was around $30 a week support. Well, Albert Moon, he had come supplied with a gun, and in those days you didn't have any way to screen. They didn't even worry about it. Nobody ever thought it was a dangerous situation. Pulled out the gun and started shooting. And the DA and some of the court people were headed out toward judges' chambers, which are over here. And here was the attorney's room, and the DA and other people were running out there. And so he shot at them, but then the judge came off the bench and was headed to judges' chambers, and he got him, and this little wall around, this is the witness stand. But there was just a chair, there wasn't a wall there at the time. And so he just came up here and shot the judge dead. Everybody was so shocked that they couldn't even gather themselves to grab him. Ran out the door, ran down the stairs, went out the front door, went out to 4th Avenue, the street. Police were chasing him. They came out, and there were some other cars. And they followed him, and they got him and took him to the hospital and so on. But anyway, the bullet holes they've kept here, they could have covered them up so that they couldn't be seen at all, but they thought this is history, so you feel it right here. See, there's one here, and there's one, and there may have been more, I don't know, but these are the ones that are still here. Did you see that little dark spot? There's sort of a dark putty in there. And then over here, this one I always have a little more trouble finding. It's up in here. I don't know why. Oh, here, right here. I always look too high. It's right here. So you can see he was not trying just to kill the judge, but he didn't like anybody involved. So he was, they had the trial, he was sentenced, he had a number of appeals. And then on the appeals, the conviction was upheld. I mean, after all, there was a courtroom full of witnesses. And in Pennsylvania, well, first of all, he got the death penalty. There was an electric chair in those days. But you had to be sane at the time you were executed, that you really could fully understand what was happening to you. Well, they did have the decision by the court after testimony from psychiatrists. At the time of the shooting, he was perfectly sane. By the time all these years had gone by with appeals and everything, they decided he wasn't sane for the purpose of being electrocuted and killed in the electric chair. So he continued to live on. So anyway, many years before I was a judge, I was a district attorney. I would get a letter every year from Norman Moon, and it was crazy. And I think he wrote a letter sounding that way so that the DA at the time would say, oh, we won't go after Norman Moon anymore. He's obviously still insane. I mean, that's my guess, because the letter, you should have seen them. They were really very, very, not confused. It was sort of intentionally bizarre, is what it seemed to me. So, anyway, he finally just died in prison. That was the end of Norman Moon. So that was.
Thank you.
That was the story. Warren County history, and really, you'd think that something like that would have happened in the Wild West, but at the time, it was the first time that a judge was shot, killed, and died in a courtroom. Our historical society has the gun, and I'm retired now, but when I was sitting up here, I could not. In fact, now I still can't. I just can't look at the gun. And there's a picture of Judge Wade lying here, dead with the blood. And I couldn't look at that either. But if you want to see Judge Wade, his portrait.